All right. Looks like we're about ready to go here. Thank you all for joining us for this presentation. If you have any questions, as I said earlier, please submit them using the Q&A button in the webinar, and we'll be sure to answer them at the end of the presentation. Today's presentation is about using swaps for risk management. And today we have the presenter, David Becker, who's our senior analyst here at the Jacobson, doing the organic and non-GMO bulletins for us. David, do you want to go ahead and kick this off with the crew?
Oh, sure. Thanks very much, George. As George mentioned, I'm the organic and non-GMO analyst at the Jacobson. Prior to joining the Jacobson about 5 years ago, I worked in many different capital markets endeavors, including 2 investment banks and 3 different hedge funds, mainly as a portfolio manager, focusing on risks and risks in the derivative space. And with that said, what I would like to do is start with a short video which will give you an idea of what swaps are all about. It will only take about 2 minutes, but it's a helpful way of giving you a 30,000-foot view of what I'm going to be talking about. George, do you mind running that video?
Charles is an ingredient buyer. He is concerned that the price of organic corn will rise over the next 6 months and ruin a project he's working on. Normally, Charles would just buy organic corn and store it in his corn silo. But his silo is full. It seems all the corn silos within 100 miles are also full. What can Charles do? A solution is Charles can purchase an organic corn swap. Charles's friend George recently explained the concept of a swap. A swap is a contract between 2 parties that involves the exchange of pre-agreed cash flows. Instead of Charles buying corn from George, he has an agreement with George that he will receive a cash payment if the price of organic corn rises from current levels. Charles and George will never exchange organic corn. This is completely a financial transaction. Charles will be paying a fixed price. He is the buyer and benefits if the price of organic corn rises. George will be paying a floating price. He is the seller and will benefit if the price of organic corn falls. A swap can be used by commercial players who are looking to hedge their exposure to organic corn prices, or speculators who are looking to benefit from prices rising or falling. Organic corn prices can be volatile. From mid-2016 to mid-2018, organic corn prices rose 40%. From mid-2018 through Q1 2019, prices have declined 20%. Charles and George have agreed that the price of an organic corn swap will be calculated by using the average of daily prices of organic corn during a calendar month reported by the Jacobson. George describes to Charles that if he buys a swap for the next 6 months at $8 per bushel and the prices rise, he will receive a payout. They agree that the swap will be calculated using 100,000 bushels per month over the next 6 months. Each month, both Charles and George will agree on the average price for the month using an independent source. George says to Charles, here is an example. Let's say at the end of the month, the price rises to $9. We will calculate the payout each month by subtracting the calculated average from the initial fixed price. Charles will receive a payment from George that equals 100,000 bushels multiplied by $1. George explains to Charles that they need a legal agreement in place before they agree to trade an organic corn swap. The most commonly used agreement is the ISDA Master Agreement, which stands for International Swaps and Derivatives Agreement. The framework consists of a master agreement, a commodity schedule, confirmations, definition booklets, and credit support documentation. George tells Charles that he would like to use the Jacobson as the independent price reporting source to calculate the average monthly price of the swap. The Jacobson has been in business for 165 years and are known as the experts in opaque prices.
Thanks, George.
Yep.
If you don't mind pulling up the deck, that would be great.
All right. Should be sharing out there for you, Dave.
All right, good. All right, so I'll start with what is a commodity swap. And the video that we showed you focused on organic corn, but we are offering the expertise in commodity swaps for all the products that the Jacobson covers and all the price and time series that are available to clients of the Jacobson. So a swap is, as I mentioned, a financial transaction. So there's no exchange of physical commodities in a financial swap. And that's what we're going to be talking about. It's pre-agreed cash flows. And you can be either the fixed price payer, which is the buyer, or the floating price payer, which is the seller. And those are sort of complex swap terms, but in the end, it's really about buying and selling a financial product that's going to allow you to either benefit or hedge your commodity exposure using a risk management tool. All right, so who can use a swap? The swaps are geared toward different players. And for the most part, you either want to use it as a risk management tool to hedge your commodity exposure, or potentially to speculate on the direction of a market without having to buy physical commodities. So an example could be organic corn, organic soybeans, tallow, yellow grease, wheat midds. If you believe that the price is going to rise and you want to mitigate that exposure without buying a physical commodity, you can use a swap as a transaction that will allow you to benefit, as we saw in the video, if the price rises. So an ingredients buyer would be somebody who would have exposure to organic corn or organic soybean meal. In the organic space, ingredient buyers who are either making feed or feeding feed to broilers or layers or dairy would have exposure to rising prices, and a swap, if you weren't going to buy the physical commodity, is a way to mitigate that risk using the fixed for floating swap with a counterparty. All right, one of the things we showed in the video, which is just another example of what we're showing you now, is this is organic corn prices, the weekly prices that I pulled off of the Jacobson website, showing how prices rose 40% within a 2-year period, and then since then have declined rapidly by between 20 and 25% since reaching the highs in mid-2018. What the volatility in these markets show you is that it's important for either ingredient buyers or farmers or people who have exposure to these commodities to determine whether or not they want to either take those risks or lock in those cash flows. So if you are a physical commodity merchandiser or ingredient buyer or farmer, you have that exposure on the outset of either purchasing or producing that particular commodity. And you have to determine as part of your business whether or not you want to keep that exposure, and sometimes merchandisers want to take that risk, or hedge that exposure. Now, one of the ways you can always hedge it is to do a future physical sale, but not in every case can you lock in those particular contracts. And so the financial swap gives you a way to manage those predictable cash flows. Okay, so calculating an organic corn swap is the way we do it at the Jacobson, and the way we suggest is taking the average daily prices that you would receive from the Jacobson for the particular commodity that you plan to use and calculate a monthly average. And the Jacobson calculates monthly averages as well as quarterly averages as well as annual averages. And a swap can be made up of any different type of time frame that you determine you want to make it up for. So it could be a monthly time frame where there is a monthly change of cash flows, but it could also be quarterly or even annually. And that depends on how the two parties determine they want to create a swap. All right, so we gave an example in the video, and this is similar. If an ingredient buyer decides to pay fixed for a 6-month period, and it's a monthly swap where there's going to be a monthly change of cash flows, what you would determine is what is the average price at the end of the first month, second month, so on and so forth for the next 6 months. So, for example, if at the end of the first month, the price was $9 per bushel and the fixed price was $8 per bushel, the floating price payer or the seller would pay the buyer the difference between $8 and $9 multiplied by the number of bushels in this particular case. And if it was for a product like soybean oil, you would do it for dollars per pound or dollars per metric ton, but each of those particular items would be worked out, and then you would swap cash flows based on the average price relative to the initial fixed price. For swap agreements, there is a standard within the industry that's been used for decades, and the standard for contractual obligations is the ISDA Master Agreement, and that stands for International Swaps and Derivatives Agreement. And it's a pretty robust agreement that goes through and describes all the types of nuances that each party would have to adhere to be able to do an agreement. And within that agreement, there would be a schedule which describes how the different swaps or any other derivatives would take place. It would also have confirmations and what a confirmation looked like. And we're going to show you what a confirmation could look like. It would have definitions for all the particular products within there, as well as any credit support documentation. And I will talk about credit a little bit later. So I had mentioned this before, but this is a perfect example. When would you use a swap? So assuming that you're not going to speculate on it, but you never know. For example, if you want to speculate on organic corn, it's nearly impossible. So one way you could potentially do it is, as opposed to buying physical corn, doing a swap to speculate on it. There are some ETFs that have companies in it, but they're not necessarily related to organic corn. They could be organic produce. So if you had products, tallow, yellow grease, wheat midds, that you want to speculate on, this would be one way to go about doing it. But if you were a producer and you wanted to, you were raising, we'll just use organic corn as one of the examples, and you had half of your production sold via contracts and wanted to sell the rest of it, but you weren't able to do that. You could use an organic corn swap to sell your production, but you wouldn't sell it physically, you would sell it financially. So now you have a locked-in price. If the prices continue to go down and you actually offset how much you had produced with the organic corn swap, the decline in the price of organic corn in the swap should match the decline in the price that you would receive for the organic corn, in the particular location. If the price continued to rise, well, you would gain on your physical organic corn that you didn't sell, eventually being able to contract it, and you would lose on your financial swap that you used to hedge your exposure. And that's one way that, for example, a producer could use a swap as a risk management tool. All right, so swaps are regulated in the United States by the CFTC, which is underneath the Securities and Exchange Commission. The CFTC has several different regulations about who needs to report swaps. It depends on the size of the company, the size of your swap book, if you have done swaps before, and if you are using it as a hedging tool compared to possibly as a speculative tool. So one of the things that it says is if you're under X size as well as using it as a hedging tool, you don't have to show us any of the swaps that you have. And those regulations are pretty clear cut. Dodd-Frank was the last time the CFTC updated who needed to report their regulatory to the CFTC. All right, so we put together a swap sample confirm. When this is over, you'll receive, if you request, this URL that will show you the swap confirmation as well as the little video that you took a look at before. We've, actually written out everything that you would need and have a good view of exactly what a confirmation would look like. Confirmations after you complete the transaction would be exchanged between two parties confirming the trade, so it will be written as well as verbally approved. Okay, so in showing people and talking about the different swaps that the Jacobson would be able to help you transact, I've had a number of questions, and here are some of the questions. So, what prices are used and how are they calculated? So, we are recommending all the prices are the Jacobson prices, and the Jacobson prices are calculated per vertical in somewhat of a different measure, but for the most part, we have an extensive process that we go through to determine a particular product in a region. For example, in organic corn, there's an approximate 300-mile radius around Des Moines, Iowa, which I use. I speak to dozens of merchandisers getting daily prices from them, and those daily prices are what make up the daily price that I post for the Jacobson. We keep years of that data, and that data would allow you to see historical average prices that would be used to calculate a swap. And then with those historical prices and the averages that you see, you can get an idea of where a swap could go and how it would look like and what the calculation would be for a fixed price relative to a floating price. We could do any type of analysis that you're looking for to determine what levels would be good levels to hedge your exposure compared to which levels would be good levels to leave that alone. We could give you historical ranges, standard deviations around ranges. So the historical data that the Jacobson has on different swap prices from all of our verticals are a critical tool prior to actually transacting a swap. Does the Jacobson charge for swaps? The answer is no. We're not going to charge anything for any of the swaps that we have. Will the Jacobson match buyers and sellers? Yes. We will do our best to find people for you to transact with as part of being a client of the Jacobson. How will the credit be handled? Credit is a bilateral agreement between two counterparties. For all of the products that the Jacobson offers, for the most part, these are our own opaque prices that we collect data from. There is no futures exchange or no clearinghouse that's going to, at this particular point, give you bilateral credit agreements. So it's not going to be as simple as going to the futures market and saying, I want to buy CBOT corn, just as an example in the organic corn space. You would do agreements with the same people that you would consider doing agreements with in the physical market. You're taking their credit. The Jacobson will also help you with, if you're interested in creating bilateral margining agreements with your counterparty, so you can actually have credit where you swap margin on a daily basis. This is similar to what a clearinghouse would do. For example, what Clearport would do in terms of requesting that you post margin. But these agreements are bilateral agreements, so you're taking the credit of the counterparty that you're dealing with. And lastly, who handles transaction regulation? And the answer is each individual counterparty, each person that decides they want to do swaps has to determine whether or not their company needs to report the swaps to the CFTC or they don't. If you need legal help, we will point you to lawyers that we've contacted, that we have relationships with, who have done these type of agreements before, who will work with you to determine whether or not you need to report to the CFTC. Those same lawyers can help you with the entire ISDA master agreement, as well as everything that comes from the confirmation as well.
Thanks, David. This is a good time for any attendees. If you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A section. We do have one question. The first question I have here, David, is for if I want to do a swap for Tallow, who at the Jacobson do I contact to assist me with that?
Okay, so if you start, you will start with me, and then I will work with the different people at the Jacobson, Ryan and Bob, who will help you with the data and analyzing the data to be able to do it. But you can start with contacting me.
Okay, and David, what's the best way for them to contact you?
You can contact me either by my email, david@thejacobson.com, or my phone number, and I'll give it out right now, 516-263-4327. But there should, we will fire you an email afterwards that will give you that contact information as well.